Girl found crying in forest, then a wolf appears, what follows stuns rescuers. The forest was eerily quiet that evening, the setting sun casting long shadows across the trees. A soft mist clung to the ground, winding through the undergrowth like a ghost. The search party moved carefully, their flashlights cutting through the gloom, their voices low as they called out into the stillness. "Ellie? Ellie, can you hear us?" Among them was Sarah, a seasoned park ranger who had been leading rescue missions for years. Yet tonight an unease gnawed at her, a feeling she couldn't shake. They had been searching for hours after the report came in. A missing girl, just 7 years old, last seen wandering near the edge of the forest. Time was running out. The temperature was dropping fast, and Sarah knew how unforgiving the wilderness could be at night. "Anything?" she asked one of the volunteers, her voice sharp with urgency. The young man shook his head, his expression grim. "No sign of her. But we found footprints about a mile back. Looked fresh." Sarah's jaw tightened. Footprints were something but not enough. Not out here where predators lurked and the terrain was treacherous. She radioed the other teams, her voice steady despite the worry building in her chest. "Keep looking. She can't have gone far." As the group pressed deeper into the woods, the faint sound of crying broke through the silence. Sarah froze, her head snapping toward the noise. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, holding up a hand to stop the others. They listened, their breaths held. The sound came again, faint but unmistakable, the soft, heart-wrenching sobs of a child. "This way," Sarah said, her voice low but firm. She moved quickly, her flashlight sweeping the forest floor as she followed the sound. The crying grew louder, more distinct, until finally they reached a small clearing. There, sitting on the ground with her knees pulled to her chest, was a little girl. Her dark hair was tangled with leaves, her face streaked with tears. She looked up as the light fell on her, her eyes wide with fear and relief. "Ellie," Sarah said gently, lowering herself to the girl's level. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're here to help you." The girl didn't respond immediately. Her gaze darted to the shadows behind Sarah, her body trembling. "He's coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Sarah frowned. "Who's coming, Ellie? Is someone else out here?" Before Ellie could answer, a low growl rumbled through the air, freezing everyone in their tracks. Sarah turned, her flashlight sweeping across the clearing, but she saw nothing. The growl came again, closer this time, sending shivers down her spine. "Stay calm," she said, her voice steady but firm. She motioned for the others to step back, her hand instinctively moving to the bear spray on her belt. "We're not alone." The underbrush rustled and a shape emerged from the shadows. At first it was difficult to make out, a blur of fur and muscle, but as it stepped into the light, Sarah's breath caught. A massive wolf stood at the edge of the clearing, its amber eyes glowing in the dim light. Its fur was dark, almost black, and its posture was tense, its gaze locked on the group. One of the volunteers let out a startled gasp, taking a step back. "Is that a wolf?" Sarah raised a hand, signaling for silence. "Stay still," she said softly, her eyes never leaving the wolf. "Don't make any sudden moves." But to her astonishment, the wolf didn't attack. It didn't growl or bare its teeth. Instead, it stepped closer to the girl, its movements deliberate but unthreatening. Ellie reached out, her hand trembling as she touched the wolf's fur. It let out a low, rumbling sound, not a growl but something softer, almost like a purr. Sarah started, her mind racing. Wolves didn't behave like this. They were wild animals, predators. And yet, here was this massive creature, standing protectively beside a child as though it were her guardian. "Ellie," Sarah said cautiously, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know this wolf?" The girl nodded slowly, her fingers curling into the wolf's thick fur. "He saved me," she said, her voice small but steady. "When I got lost, he found me. He kept me warm." Sarah exchanged a stunned glance with the other rescuers. This was impossible, unbelievable. But the evidence was right in front of them. The wolf turned its head towards Sarah, its golden eyes meeting hers. For a moment, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her, as though the animal were trying to communicate something. Then it stepped back, nudging Ellie gently with its nose. "He wants me to go with you," Ellie said, standing shakily. She clung to the wolf for support, her small frame dwarfed by its size. "But he's not leaving until he knows I'm safe." Sarah nodded, her heart pounding. "Okay, Ellie. We're going to get you out of here. Stay close to me." As the group began the trek back through the forest, the wolf followed at a distance, its presence both reassuring and unnerving. It moved silently, its massive paws making no sound on the forest floor. Sarah couldn't help but glance back frequently, her mind grappling with the surrealness of the situation. Ellie stayed close to Sarah, her hand clutching the ranger's jacket. "He's been with me since last night," she said quietly. "I was so cold and I was scared. But he stayed with me. He didn't let anything hurt me." Sarah's throat tightened. "You're very brave, Ellie," she said softly. "And so is he." By the time they reached the edge of the forest, the wolf stopped. It stood still, watching as the search party emerged into the open field where emergency vehicles and Ellie's frantic parents were waiting. Sarah turned, half expecting the wolf to disappear back into the shadows. But it stayed, its golden eyes following Ellie as the girl ran into her parents' arms. The rescuers cheered, the tension breaking as the family reunited. But Sarah's gaze remained fixed on the wolf. It stood at the forest's edge, its posture calm yet commanding as though it were standing guard. Then, with one last look at Sarah, it turned and slipped silently back into the trees. "Did you see that?" one of the volunteers asked, his voice filled with awe. "I've never seen anything like it." "Neither have I," Sarah murmured. But as she looked at Ellie, safe and warm in her parents' embrace, she couldn't help but feel a deep gratitude for the mysterious creature that had defied everything she thought she knew. The days following Ellie's rescue were filled with relief, joy, and curiosity. Her parents couldn't stop hugging her, marveling at the miracle of her survival in the cold, unforgiving forest. But while everyone celebrated, Sarah couldn't shake the questions swirling in her mind. The wolf, its behavior, its presence, its connection to Ellie, was a mystery that defied explanation. She found herself replaying the events in her mind, searching for logic where there seemed to be none. Ellie's story only deepened the enigma. She sat at the kitchen table, bundled in a blanket, as Sarah visited their home to get a clearer account of what had happened. The little girl's cheeks were still flushed from the cold, but her eyes sparkled with the innocence and wonder of someone who didn't fully grasp the magnitude of her experience. "So, Ellie," Sarah began gently, her notepad resting on her knee. "Can you tell me how you got lost?" Ellie fidgeted with the edge of her blanket. "I was playing near the trail," she said, her voice small. "Mom and Dad said to stay close, but I saw a butterfly. It was so pretty and I wanted to follow it. I didn't mean to go far." Sarah nodded, her heart aching at the simplicity of it. A child's curiosity, so innocent, had nearly led to tragedy. "And then what happened?" "I walked and walked," Ellie continued, her brow furrowing. "But I couldn't find the butterfly anymore. Then I couldn't see the trail. It got dark and I was scared." Ellie paused, glancing at her parents who sat nearby, their expressions a mix of guilt and gratitude. "And then I heard something in the bushes," Ellie said. "I thought it was a monster, but it wasn't. It was him." "Him?" Sarah prompted. "The wolf," Ellie said, her voice steady. "He was big and scary at first, but he didn't hurt me. He just sat there looking at me with his shiny eyes. Then he walked up and nudged me like he wanted me to follow him." Ellie's mother gasped softly, covering her mouth with her hand. Sarah leaned forward, her interest piqued. "And you followed him?" Ellie nodded. "He took me to a place with trees all around. It was like a little cave made of branches. He laid down next to me and I wasn't cold anymore. I wasn't scared either because he stayed with me all night." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Wolves were territorial and wild. They didn't shepherd lost children through the forest, much less protect them from the elements. "Did anything else happen?" she asked. Ellie hesitated, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes he looked at the trees like he heard something. But nothing ever came close. I think he scared everything away." Sarah exchanged a glance with Ellie's parents. "Do you remember what happened when we found you?" she asked. Ellie smiled faintly. "He didn't leave me until you came. He stayed because he wanted to make sure I was safe." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Sarah couldn't help but feel a deep respect for the creature Ellie described. A guardian who had stepped in when no one else could. But the questions remained: why? And how? That night, as Sarah sat at her desk reviewing her notes, she decided to dig deeper. She searched online for any mention of wolves behaving in such a way, scouring articles, wildlife journals, and even folklore. Most accounts described wolves as intelligent and cautious but fundamentally wild. Yet, there were whispers of other stories, tales of wolves protecting humans in times of need, their behavior inexplicably gentle and altruistic. One account in particular caught her attention. It described an old legend from the area, passed down through generations of local tribes. The legend spoke of a spirit guardian, a wolf that appeared during moments of great peril to guide and protect those who were lost. According to the story, the wolf was a bridge between the natural and spiritual worlds, driven by an unshakable sense of duty to preserve life. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her heart racing. Could it be possible? Could Ellie's wolf have been more than just an ordinary animal? The rational part of her resisted the idea, but the events she had witnessed defied all logic. She closed her laptop, her mind swimming with possibilities. The next day, Sarah returned to the forest. She told herself it was for closure, to retrace the steps of the rescue and ensure there were no loose ends. But deep down she knew she was searching for something else, something that might explain what she had seen. The forest was quiet as she walked the trail, her boots crunching softly on the frosty ground. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled patterns on the earth. She reached the clearing where they had found Ellie, her breath clouding in the cold air. There was no sign of the wolf. No tracks, no fur, nothing to indicate he had ever been there. Yet Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled as she scanned the trees, half expecting to see those piercing amber eyes staring back at her. She knelt in the clearing, brushing her fingers over the ground where Ellie had sat. The earth was undisturbed, as though the events of that night had been wiped clean. But as she stood to leave, a faint sound reached her ears, a soft, mournful howl that echoed through the forest. Sarah froze, her heart pounding. The sound was distant but unmistakable, carrying a haunting melody that seemed to vibrate in her chest. She turned toward the direction of the sound, her eyes searching the trees. For a fleeting moment she thought she saw a shape, dark and massive, moving silently through the shadows. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The howl faded, and the forest returned to its usual quiet. Sarah stood there for a long time, the weight of the experience settling over her. Whatever the wolf was, spirit, guardian, or just an extraordinary animal, it had left an indelible mark on her. She knew she would never forget those amber eyes, the quiet power and compassion they had held. As she made her way back to her truck, a sense of peace washed over her. The forest, with all its mysteries, had revealed something remarkable. And though she might never fully understand it, she knew one thing for certain. Ellie's wolf had been a protector, a guide, and perhaps a reminder that even in the wildest places, extraordinary connections could be found. In the weeks that followed, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was calling her back. Every night, as she lay in bed, she replayed the sound of that haunting howl and the piercing amber eyes that had watched over Ellie. It wasn't just curiosity, something deeper compelled her to return, as though the forest itself had more to reveal. Ellie, too, seemed forever changed by her experience. Though she returned to the routines of childhood, playing with friends, attending school, there was a newfound quietness about her. She would sometimes stare out the window, her gaze distant, as though searching for something she couldn't name. One evening, as Sarah visited Ellie's family to check in, the little girl tugged at her hand. "I want to show you something," Ellie said, her voice soft but insistent. Sarah followed her to the backyard, where Ellie pointed to a small wooden box she had placed near a tree. "I made this for him," Ellie explained. "In case he ever comes back." The box was simple but thoughtful. Inside, Ellie had placed a drawing of the wolf, along with a few small treasures, a shiny rock, a feather, and a folded piece of paper. "It's a thank you," Ellie said, "for saving me." Sarah knelt beside her, touched by the gesture. "That's beautiful, Ellie. He'd be proud." Ellie looked up, her eyes bright. "Do you think he'll come back?" Sarah hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I think he'll always be watching over you, even if you don't see him." That night, as Sarah drove home, her thoughts were heavy with questions she couldn't answer. What was it about Ellie's wolf that had defied everything she knew about animals? And why had it appeared when it did? The next morning, Sarah made a decision. She contacted a local tribal elder named Joseph, a man known for his deep knowledge of the forest's history and its legends. She explained everything: the missing girl, the wolf's extraordinary behavior, and the strange connection Ellie seemed to have with it. Joseph listened intently, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he sat back in his chair, his weathered hands clasped in his lap. "You've encountered something rare," he said finally. "Something most people wouldn't believe if they hadn't seen it themselves. Do you think it was the spirit guardian?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with both hope and skepticism. Joseph nodded slowly. "That's what our stories call it, yes. The guardian is said to appear in times of great need, especially to protect the innocent. It bridges the worlds of man and nature, serving as both a guide and a protector." "But why Ellie?" Sarah pressed. "Why now?" Joseph smiled faintly. "Perhaps the better question is why not? The forest chooses its moments. Perhaps the wolf saw something in Ellie that was worth saving. Or perhaps she reminded it of something it had once protected. These are mysteries we aren't meant to fully understand. Sarah left their meeting feeling both enlightened and humbled. The elder's words resonated with her, adding layers of meaning to the events she had witnessed. It wasn't just about a missing girl and a wolf. It was about the connections that existed beyond the tangible, the ways in which the world's mysteries intertwined. One evening, Sarah found herself drawn back to the forest. She had no clear reason for returning, only a sense that there was something unfinished. She followed the same path they had taken during the rescue, her flashlight cutting through the growing dusk. The air was crisp and cool, the forest alive with the rustle of leaves and the distant calls of birds. As she reached the clearing where they had found Ellie, she stopped. The place felt different now, quieter, as though it held its breath. Sarah knelt on the ground, running her fingers over the earth. It was undisturbed, but she felt a presence, an energy that prickled along her skin. Then from the shadows a familiar shape emerged. The wolf stood at the edge of the clearing, its amber eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Sarah's breath caught as their gazes met. For a moment, neither of them moved, the world narrowing to just the two of them. "Thank you," Sarah said softly, her voice trembling. She wasn't sure if the wolf could understand her words, but she spoke from her heart. "For saving her. For being there when we couldn't." The wolf tilted its head slightly, its expression almost thoughtful. Then, with a quiet grace, it turned and disappeared into the trees, its form melting into the shadows. Sarah stayed in the clearing for a long time, her heart full of gratitude and wonder. She knew she might never see the wolf again, but that didn't matter. Its presence had left an indelible mark on her life, a reminder of the extraordinary bonds that could exist between humans and the natural world. When she finally left the forest, the sky was alight with stars, their brilliance a fitting backdrop for the mystery she had just experienced. She didn't have all the answers, but she didn't need them. Some mysteries, she realized, were meant to remain just that, beautiful, untouchable, and eternal. And somewhere deep in the forest, the spirit guardian watched, its amber eyes glowing softly in the dark, ever vigilant, ever present. In the weeks that followed Sarah's final encounter with the wolf, its presence lingered in her mind like the echo of a forgotten melody. Though she went about her daily life, patrolling the park, leading school groups through the forest trails, and handling the mundane tasks of her job, the wolf's amber eyes seemed to follow her everywhere. It wasn't just the memory of its gaze, it was the profound sense of connection, as though she had been touched by something far greater than herself. Ellie too seemed forever changed. She no longer feared the forest but spoke of it with reverence, as though it were a living, breathing entity. She often drew pictures of the wolf, its strong, protective form standing tall in the shadows of towering trees. Her parents, once wary of the wilderness that had almost taken their daughter, found themselves drawn to Ellie's newfound sense of wonder. One chilly morning, Ellie's mother called Sarah unexpectedly. "Ellie's been asking to go back to the forest," she said, her tone a mix of hesitation and hope. "She says she wants to leave something for the wolf. I thought maybe you could help us." Sarah didn't hesitate. "Of course," she said. "I'd be happy to." The next day, Sarah met Ellie and her parents at the trailhead. Ellie carried a small wicker basket, its contents hidden beneath a cloth. She clutched it tightly as they walked, her eyes scanning the trees as if expecting the wolf to appear at any moment. "What's in the basket?" Sarah asked, crouching beside her. "A thank you gift," Ellie said, her voice serious. "He saved me, so I want to give him something special." They followed the familiar path into the forest, the crisp air carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Ellie led the way with surprising confidence, her small figure moving purposefully through the undergrowth. Her parents exchanged nervous glances, but Sarah reassured them with a nod. When they reached the clearing, Ellie stopped and turned to Sarah. "This is where he found me," she said. "I want to leave it here." Ellie knelt in the center of the clearing, placing the basket carefully on the ground. She removed the cloth, revealing its contents: a small loaf of bread, a handful of berries, and another one of her drawings, a portrait of the wolf surrounded by stars and trees. She arranged the items neatly, then sat back on her heels. "Do you think he'll find it?" she asked Sarah, her eyes wide with hope. "I think he already knows it's here," Sarah replied, her voice soft. Ellie smiled, her expression serene. For a moment, the clearing was silent, the only sound the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. Then from somewhere deep in the forest, a howl rang out. It was long and low, its mournful beauty sending shivers through everyone present. Ellie gasped, her hands clasped over her mouth. "It's him," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Her parents looked at Sarah, their expressions a mix of awe and disbelief. That's incredible," Ellie's mother said. "Do you think he's watching us?" Sarah's gaze lingered on the tree line, her heart swelling with a strange sense of peace. "I think he's always watching," she said. "He's part of this place." The howl faded into the stillness, but its impact lingered. Ellie stood and brushed off her knees, her face radiant. "I'm ready to go now," she said, taking her father's hand. As they made their way back to the trailhead, Sarah couldn't help but glance over her shoulder. The forest seemed alive with an energy she couldn't quite describe, as though it were pulsing with gratitude for the small act of kindness left behind. Months later, as winter blanketed the forest in snow, Sarah found herself drawn back to the clearing. She had no specific reason to visit, only the nagging feeling that there was something waiting for her. The air was crisp and silent, the snow crunching softly beneath her boots as she walked. When she reached the clearing, she stopped, her breath clouding in the cold air. The basket Ellie had left was gone. In its place was something else, a cluster of stones arranged in a careful circle. At the center sat a single pine cone, perfectly intact as though it had been placed there deliberately. Sarah knelt, her gloved fingers brushing the stones. They were smooth and cool, their arrangement too precise to be random. She stared at the pine cone, a sense of wonder washing over her. It was as though the forest had responded, its guardian leaving a message in return. A soft rustling sound caught her attention and she looked up. Standing at the edge of the clearing was the wolf. Its coat shimmered in the pale light, and its amber eyes held a calm, almost knowing expression. Sarah froze, her heart pounding, but the wolf didn't move. It stood still, watching her with a quiet intensity. "Thank you," Sarah said aloud, her voice steady. "For everything." The wolf tilted its head slightly, then turned and disappeared into the trees. Sarah remained in the clearing for a long time, the snow falling gently around her. She didn't follow it, she didn't need to. The forest, with all its mysteries and magic, had spoken. And Sarah knew that, whatever the wolf was, it would always be there, watching, protecting, and reminding her of the extraordinary bonds that existed between the natural world and the people who dared to believe in it. As she made her way back to the trailhead, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. The wolf's presence, the forest's quiet beauty, and Ellie's unwavering faith had all shown her something profound. That the world was full of wonders, waiting for those brave enough to see them. And as she stepped into the falling snow, she knew she would carry that wonder with her, always. The snow had begun to fall harder by the time Sarah reached her truck at the trailhead. The flakes whirled in the wind, clinging to her jacket and dampening her hair. She sat behind the wheel, her breath fogging the windshield as she tried to process what she'd just seen. The wolf, the circle of stones, the deliberate placement of the pine cone, it was impossible yet undeniably real. She couldn't shake the feeling that the forest had spoken to her, its ancient, untamed spirit reaching out in a way she barely understood. As she started the engine, the faint sound of a howl broke through the wind. It was distant but clear, its mournful tone cutting through the storm. Sarah froze, her hands gripping the wheel. The sound wasn't coming from the direction of the forest, it was closer, too close. She rolled down her window, her heart pounding. The snow whipped into the truck, stinging her face as she strained to hear. The howl came again, louder this time, and with it came a sound that made her blood run cold, a low guttural growl followed by a sharp yelp of pain. It was the unmistakable sound of an animal in distress. Without thinking, Sarah threw the truck into reverse, backing out of the trailhead parking lot and onto the snow-covered road. The tires slid slightly, the icy surface threatening to pull her off course, but she kept her focus. The growls and yelps echoed through the trees, guiding her back toward the forest. The storm had turned the world into a swirling chaos of white, but Sarah didn't hesitate. If the wolf was in danger, she couldn't turn away. She parked at the nearest clearing and grabbed her flashlight, her boots sinking into the snow as she hurried toward the sounds. The wind howled around her, the trees creaking under the weight of the storm. Her breath came in short bursts, the cold air stinging her lungs as she pushed deeper into the woods. "Hello," she called, her voice nearly swallowed by the storm. "Is someone there?" A sharp bark answered her, followed by a pained whimper. Sarah's pulse quickened as she adjusted her flashlight, the beam cutting through the blinding snow. She moved quickly, her boots crunching through the icy ground, until she reached a small clearing. The scene before her was both terrifying and surreal. The wolf stood in the center of the clearing, its massive form crouched low, its lips pulled back in a snarl. Blood streaked its dark fur, and its golden eyes glowed with a fierce intensity. Opposite it, a pack of coyotes circled, their wiry bodies sleek and predatory. Their yellow eyes gleamed with hunger, their growls rumbling in unison as they edged closer. Sarah's breath caught. The wolf was outnumbered, 5 against 1. Its injuries were obvious, its movements sluggish, yet it stood its ground, refusing to back down. The coyotes snapped at the air, testing its defenses, their coordination unnervingly precise. "Hey!" Sarah shouted, stepping into the clearing. She waved her flashlight wildly, trying to draw their attention. "Get out of here." The coyotes hesitated, their heads snapping toward her. For a moment, the clearing was silent except for the howling wind. Then, as though deciding she wasn't a threat, they turned their focus back to the wolf, their growls growing louder. Sarah felt a surge of desperation. She grabbed a branch from the ground, brandishing it like a weapon as she moved closer. "I said get out of here," she yelled, her voice breaking with panic. She swung the branch, the motion scattering snow into the air. One of the coyotes lunged at the wolf, its teeth bared. The wolf dodged clumsily, its injured leg buckling beneath it. Sarah acted on instinct, throwing the branch with all her strength. It struck the attacking coyote on the side, sending it yelping into the snow. The pack snarled, their attention finally shifting to Sarah. Her heart pounded as the largest coyote stepped forward, its body tense, its eyes fixed on her. She backed away slowly, her hands trembling as she searched for another weapon. The wolf let out a guttural growl, staggering to its feet despite its injuries. It moved between Sarah and the coyotes, its posture protective. The pack hesitated, their formation faltering. The wolf let out a thunderous snarl, its teeth flashing in the dim light. The coyotes wavered, their growls turning into uncertain whines. Finally, one by one, they retreated into the trees, their shadows disappearing into the storm. Sarah collapsed to her knees, her chest heaving as relief and adrenaline coursed through her. The wolf stood over her, its breathing labored, its golden eyes scanning the clearing for any remaining threats. Blood dripped onto the snow, staining it crimson. "You're hurt," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse. She reached out slowly, her hand trembling as it hovered near the wolf's fur. "Let me help you." The wolf didn't move, its gaze locked on hers. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a quiet whimper, it lowered its head, its body swaying slightly as it allowed her touch. Sarah's heart broke at the sight. She moved carefully, inspecting its wounds as best she could in the storm. Deep gashes marked its side, and one of its legs was bent at an unnatural angle. It wouldn't survive long without help. "I'm going to get you out of here," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her. "Just hold on." Using her jacket as a makeshift sling, she supported the wolf as they made their way back toward the road. It leaned heavily against her, its weight staggering, but it didn't resist. The storm howled around them, the snow blinding and relentless, but Sarah pushed forward, driven by sheer determination. When they finally reached the truck, she heaved the wolf into the back seat, her arms burning with the effort. She wrapped it in a blanket, whispering words of comfort as she climbed into the driver's seat. As she sped toward the nearest wildlife rehabilitation center, she glanced in the rearview mirror. The wolf's eyes met hers, their golden depths filled with something she couldn't quite name: gratitude, trust, and perhaps a shared understanding that their bond was no longer just chance. It was fate. The drive to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center felt endless, the snowstorm making visibility nearly impossible. Sarah's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white as she navigated the treacherous roads. Every so often, she glanced into the rearview mirror to check on the wolf. Its golden eyes were half closed now, its body trembling beneath the blanket. She whispered to it, hoping her voice might be a balm against its pain. "Hold on," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the roar of the heater. "We're almost there. Just hold on." Finally, the lights of the rehabilitation center came into view, glowing faintly through the swirling snow. Sarah pulled into the parking lot, her tires crunching against the icy ground. She jumped out, waving frantically at the glass doors. A veterinarian and 2 assistants hurried out, their faces a mix of confusion and urgency. "What do you have?" the vet asked as Sarah opened the back door. "A wolf," Sarah said, her breath visible in the frigid air. "It's injured badly. It fought off a pack of coyotes." The vet blinked, startled. "A wolf? Here?" "There's no time for questions," Sarah snapped, her desperation spilling over. "He needs help." The team moved quickly, carefully lifting the wolf onto a stretcher and rushing it inside. Sarah followed, her boots squeaking against the tiled floor as they entered the brightly lit examination room. The warmth hit her like a wave, but her relief was short-lived as the vet began assessing the wolf's injuries. Deep lacerations on the flank, the vet muttered, her gloved hands moving over the wolf's body. Possible fracture in the front leg. Significant blood loss, but he's stable for now. Sarah hovered near the doorway, her arms crossed tightly as she watched. The wolf lay motionless on the table, its chest rising and falling with labored breaths. It was a sight that made her heart ache. A creature so powerful, so majestic, brought low by violence and suffering. "Can you save him?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. The vet glanced at her, her expression serious. "We'll do everything we can. But he's wild, Sarah. Even if he survives, his instinct is to return to his territory." "I understand," Sarah said. "Just, please help him." The next several hours were a blur. The vet and her team worked tirelessly, stitching wounds, setting the fractured leg and administering fluids. Sarah stayed in the waiting room, her mind racing with memories of the wolf, its fierce protection of Ellie, its calm yet commanding presence in the forest, the way it had looked at her with an intelligence that defied explanation. When the vet finally emerged, Sarah leapt to her feet. "How is he?" "He's stable," the vet said, removing her gloves. "But it'll be a long recovery. He'll need time to heal before we can even consider releasing him." Sarah nodded, relief washing over her. "Thank you." Over the next few weeks, Sarah visited the center almost daily. The wolf, now resting in a spacious enclosure, remained wary of the staff but allowed Sarah to approach. She would sit quietly near the enclosure, speaking to it in soft tones. Sometimes she would bring items from the forest, a pine cone, a branch with fresh pine needles, hoping to remind it of home. "He trusts you," the vet observed one afternoon, watching as the wolf lifted its head to meet Sarah's gaze. "That's rare for a wild animal." Sarah smiled faintly. "I think we've been through too much together not to trust each other." As the weeks turned into months, the wolf's strength returned. Its wounds healed, its coat regained its luster, and its golden eyes sparkled with renewed life. But with its recovery came the inevitable question: what next? "He belongs in the wild," Sarah said one evening as she discussed the wolf's progress with the vet. "That's where he's meant to be." The vet nodded. "We've identified a remote area where he'll have plenty of space and minimal risk of human interference. We can transport him there when he's ready." When the day came, Sarah accompanied the wolf on the journey to its new home. They traveled in a specially designed transport vehicle, the wolf resting calmly in its enclosure. Sarah sat beside it, her hand pressed against the mesh. "You're going to be okay," she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "This is where you belong." They arrived at a sprawling wilderness reserve, its rugged landscape stretching as far as the eye could see. Snow-capped peaks loomed in the distance, and the air was crisp and clean. The wolf stepped out of the enclosure cautiously, its powerful frame silhouetted against the backdrop of the wild. Sarah stood a few feet away, her heart aching with both pride and sadness. "Go on," she said softly. "You're free now." The wolf turned, its golden eyes locking onto hers one last time. For a moment the world seemed to stand still. Then, with a quiet grace, it turned and bounded into the trees, its dark coat blending seamlessly with the shadows. Sarah watched until it disappeared, her breath hitching as a single tear slid down her cheek. She stood there for a long time, the wind brushing against her face, the wilderness stretching endlessly before her. As she turned to leave, a faint howl echoed through the air. It was a sound filled with strength, gratitude, and the indomitable spirit of the wild. Sarah smiled, her heart full. The wolf was home, and so, in a way, was she.